Hi and welcome back. In this session we'll be learning about object-oriented programming. Now what is object-oriented programming? You've heard about this many times, or probably not. Probably this is the first time you're coming across a statement called object-oriented programming. Let me put it this way. Before I even define or begin to talk about object-oriented programming, let me set the stage that it is one of the most complex parts for beginners. If you're coming from no other language, and if your Python is the first language and you're starting from scratch, then object-oriented programming is the hardest part, because it's not exactly hard, it's just the place where everybody gets confused. So let's start to begin to see how simple it is, and in this session we're going to simplify what object-oriented programming is and what exactly it means in the world of programming. And Python being an object-oriented programming language, it is very simple. And isn't simplicity a part of Python's design as well? So design philosophy. So let's get started with understanding what Python's object-oriented programming is. But you can also feel free to Google search a lot of articles out there on Python that tell you about how things work, and maybe there are a lot of other examples, but in this one we'll cover something more relevant, which we believe will make you understand or lay a great foundation. And it is really important if you can get this object-oriented programming straight and understand this and spend a lot of time and many examples and hands-on, also go over the assignments. I'm sure that you will have no problem understanding not just Python but any other language in future. So let's begin to understand what Python is. Let's construct something wherein then we will be able to understand what is an object, what is a class. So in Python, we know everything is called an object. Now let's see how we can create those objects using the class keyword, and then how we can create the class attributes, and we'll learn about creating methods in a class. Then we'll learn about inheritance and learn about some special methods for classes. So let's begin with understanding what Python is going to be, what a Python object is going to be. And let's begin with something very simple, something that's more flexible. Let's start with what we call a list, and I'll switch over to my PC here, and let's begin with the first example. All right, so I'm on my screen right now, and on my Jupyter notebook is running, and in this I will create a simple object called list and give it a variable called L, and let's say it's a list of integers. Now do you remember how we used to call methods on a list? For example, I'm referring to a method, so I want to see how many times the letter 2 is called out. So it's very simple, right? It's 1. So what we're basically doing in this lecture is we're exploring how we could create an object type like a list. So we've already learned about how to create a function, so let's explore objects in general. Now in Python, once again, I know I've repeated this many times, but let me also repeat this now and get your attention, and also demonstrate this as an example by saying in Python everything is an object. Now remember that we could use something like type, and this tells us how to check the type of an object. So Python is a very intuitive language, and it already understands without you don't have to declare a variable type explicitly. Python understands the type of your variable by default. So for example, if I say print type of this, so Python already knows this is an integer. Let's see, let's bring out all the type of all our types that we have, and then see what happens. Okay, so that is, we know, is a list. And let's see if Python recognizes a tuple. Yeah, so that's a tuple. And then I'm going to see if Python recognizes a type of what we call curly braces. You know what curly braces are. If you don't, then wait for the output. So we have covered, and let's also see what this would be if I put something like this. Yeah, type of, and I'm going to say something. So this will print out, oops, okay, I have missed a parenthesis. Great. So now this is a integer class. This type is integer. This is a list, right? This is a tuple. this is a dictionary and this is a string. So Python by default understands based on your type, based on what you put inside. So, and we know that from this we can arrive at a conclusion that these things are objects. Now how can we create our own object types? Now these are inbuilt, correct? So Python can easily recognize it without us declaring it. But how do we define our own object types? And that is where the class keyword comes in. Now sometimes we'll have to define our own type of objects. So that becomes a definition of class. So the class is a user defined object that are created by using the class keyword. Now class is also a blueprint that defines a nature of a future object. Now from classes we can construct what we call instances. An instance is a specific object created from a particular class. For example, in the list that we have here, we created an object L, right? We created this L, which was an instance of a list object, correct? This is an instance of a list object. The same way, let's see how we can use class. Okay, now we're going to create a new object called sample, or let's call it an example. Okay, so I'm commenting this saying create a new object type called example. I'm going to create this class, class, and then I will say example. Yeah, and I know you might be wondering why I used capital letter when I was talking about small letters for PEP 8. For classes alone in Python, we use the capital letter when we are declaring a new class. And then let's put a pause. So this class for now does not do anything. Now I'm going to create a instance of example. So like we just created an instance of a list here, I'm going to create an instance of sample example and say something like this, right? Now just like this we did, and now I'm going to say print type of X and then put them both in parentheses. Yeah, so now this should what do you think this should return? What do you think this should be there? And let's see how this behaves. It says class main example. So by convention we give capital letters for classes, and X is the reference. We're referencing X to our new instance of an example class. In other words, we have instantiated the example class. Now inside of the class we currently just have nothing but just say pass, but we can define class attributes or methods. Oh, what did I just say? I just said two new keywords. I mentioned attributes and methods. What are they? An attribute is a characteristic of an object, and a method is the operation we can perform with the object. So this is really crucial. I know it doesn't make sense without an example, but let's see. Let's try out an example. Let's say we can create a class called dog. An attribute of a dog, maybe its breed, or let's say it could be its name. A method of a dog may be defined by what a dog can do. What can a dog do? Let's say a typical dog would bark. So bark is a method which returns a sound, for example. So let's get a better understanding of these attributes with this example. So but before we get there, I just want to talk about the attribute. The syntax of creating an attribute is like this: attribute, and then we have something. Okay, so this is how we create. This is a syntax of an attribute, and then there is a special method. It's called init, and now this one initializes or instantiates attributes for an object. So let's start with an example. Let's see if we can create a dog. I'm going to create more cells here. All right. Okay, so I'm going to create a class for example, and then I'm going to give it a name called dog, and let's say it takes in an object. So I would then type this instantiate. I'll explain this in a while. So it's also called done D, which is nothing but double underscore, and then it takes in two parameters, itself and the breed. Now breed is the attribute, so this is how we set up an attribute. Then now you can see how it becomes. So it becomes so easy. So I can say oops, let's say this is what it is, and then the breed is equal to a Labrador. And then we have what are good dog names? Let's just say Tommy, and I'm going to call it a breed called Husky. Right. So let's break down what we've done, and what's that special method. Here we have, it's a special method. So this is, so we just created a dog class, and then the init special method is called automatically right after the object has been created. Now each attribute in a class definition begins with a reference to that instance object, right? So it is by convention it is named as self. The value passed during the class instantiation, it becomes the type of the attribute. Now we have created two instances of the dog class that we have here with two breed types. One is a lab and another is a husky, and now that we have created this, we can access them something using attributes like this. So for example, I can just say Scooby dot breed, and then it should print out whatever the breed is, right? Simple, isn't it? And at the same time I can say Tommy dot breed, and note how we don't have any parenthesis after the breed. Now this is because it's an attribute and it does not contain any arguments. In Python there is also class object attributes. Now these class object attributes are the same for any instance for the class. For example, we could create the attribute species for the dog class. Now dogs, regardless of their breed, name or other attributes, will always be mammals. So we apply this logic in this way. So I will edit this, and I'm going to actually take this very same thing, right, and I'll put this here, but I'm going to add another class object attribute. This is a class object attribute instance and not a instance of a class like what we have here. So there's a difference. You will see this. Now this is a mammal, right? And I can also have self. I can also modify to take a name, right? And in that name I can do name like this, dot name, which is equal to a name, right? So now what happens? Now this becomes like this. So we need to create an instance like this, and it will be a lab, and it will be a name, right? So that's how it becomes. Now I could do something like this, and I could do note that the class object attribute is defined outside. This is our class object method, right, where we have a special method and we are assigning the attributes to the dog object, right, to whatever the instance we're going to create in the future. We are assigning it a like, for example, a method. So a method will be doing nothing but giving us the list of whatever the value it carries. Like in this case, it carries this lab and name of the dog. But this is where we talk about what we are doing a class object attribute. So let's see some more examples in the next session. So for now, I hope you got to understand the special method and how we declare a object. See you in the next class.